Mutter.
Wo bist du eigentlich?
In Bogotá.
Ach so.
Und heute erneut mit Hoffnung auf Regen, dass man sowas mal sagt.
Ich hatte nie gedacht, dass ich Stefan etwas so hören sagen will.
Ich habe sogar geschrieben heute.
Das glaube ich dir nicht. Doch, du hast einen Schrieb, letztes Jahr hast du einen Schrieb gekauft. Als wir in dem...
Ja, stimmt. Ich bin jetzt ein stolzer Besitzer eines Regenschirms.
Ai, ai, ai.
Hast du, Sabine, also natürlich mitbekommen, rhetorische Frage eher, euer Oberbürgermeister war im Lande?
Nee, habe ich nicht mitbekommen.
Okay, der ist jetzt, glaube ich, auf dem Weg nach Ecuador, zusammen
Okay.
mit dem, weiß ich gar nicht, ob es Kollegen oder Kolleginnen sind aus Rotterdam und Antwerpen.
Wegen
Also
Drogen?
Hafenstädte, genau. Und heute geht es nach Quito und ja, ich glaube, es ist relativ kurzfristig. Ich hatte gestern, kennst du
Hm.
sicherlich auch, Karin Gabbard noch
Ja.
gesprochen. Und ja, die ist da ja, hat jetzt ja auch ein paar Interviews zu Ecuador gemacht, ein bisschen was in der Presse und
Nee,
genau, mal schauen.
also, es ist der erste Bürgermeister, ne? Wir haben keine Oberbürgermeister, gar nicht.
Oh, und das sollte ich eigentlich wissen. Ich komme ja aus der Ecke.
Und nee, das andere ist, im Mai gibt es hier in Hamburg eine große Geschichte zu den,
Pesa, ne?
ja, genau, zu den Härten.
Genau. Ja.
Rafael. Mal gucken.
By the way, I think you guys can slowly start already if you guys want to. Like these 5 minutes, I don't think they make a big difference. Everyone's just waiting right now.
How many people are
Okay.
in the room?
I think everybody's in the room. We are.
No, from the audience, I think.
No one.
You don't know.
No, the stream is still private right now. I'm
Okay.
only gonna turn it on when you guys really start. It's
Okay.
private right now. Yeah.
Yeah, as you like. So I think the announcement at Trace was 6:15, but well,
Yeah, exactly. Like it's announced to start at 6:15. So if you guys want to like wait out these 5 minutes, be my guest.
yeah, at
Are you
least.
in Germany, Lucas, or are you in Bogota?
I'm in Germany.
Okay. So we are 2 out of the 5.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Wait, everyone else is in Bogota? No.
No, Sabine, Sabine's in Germany,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, Sabine and oh,
Yeah, but
all right.
Rafael also in Bogota.
Yeah.
Mhm. Is it getting
So-
slow?
Do we know how many people do we have right now on the audience, on the YouTube channel?
The chat, the YouTube chat is only gonna get they are only gonna be able to see the stream once I make it public. I'm only gonna make it public when you guys start.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
good news because I was a little bit worried that well, the small talk here was already
Recorded.
and,
Yeah.
recorded.
Well, to be fair, I'm gonna say it right now. It is being recorded right now.
Okay. Okay.
It's already been. But people aren't gonna see it when they go on the live stream. Like,
Okay. So I don't have to worry right now.
Yeah, exactly. And if it's too much small talk, I will tell the trace people to like cut it out if it's too much at the
Okay,
beginning.
yes.
Yeah.
There might be fans of other clubs than St. Pauli, Stefan, in the trade.
Yeah, actually, I'm not St. Pauli. I'm HSV, and so
Oh, no.
that's why
I
Yeah.
quit.
with
I quit.
Rafael, we
I'm
are
out.
always.
No, I'm out. Can't.
Yeah, I know, but hincha se nace, no se hace.
Just one club you can give us in Hamburg.
However, I've already heard all jokes and all, all ways of telling me that it has been a wrong decision. Well,
One of my colleagues in the exec board, he's a very staunch HSV fan too. He was very
so
sad when they had to
shared
move them.
sufferings.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make the stream public now, by the way.
Okay,
So you
so
guys
I
know.
mute myself.
Nice.
So hello, everyone. I think we are ready to start. So thank you very much for joining us today in this panel organized by the Interdisciplinary Research Center, Transformations of Political Violence, TRACE, whose title is Colombia, Constructing Total Peace Amidst Violence. Special thanks to the following speakers who will be taking part in today's discussion as well. So Professor Dr. Sabine Kurtenbach, she is a co-leader of the German Institute for Global and Area Studies, Institute for Latin American Studies. She is also affiliated to the Center for Conflict Studies at Philipps University Marburg and is an honorary professor at the same university. Thank you, Professor Kurtenbach. Professor Dr. Stefan Peters, he is a professor for peace studies at Justus Liebig University Giessen and academic director of the German-Colombian Peace Institute, CAPAZ. He is also a principal investigator at the BMBF-funded Center, Transformations of Political Violence, TRACE. Thank you, Professor Peters. And Mr. Rafael Quishpe, who is currently a PhD researcher at the Center Transformations of Political Violence, TRACE. He holds a Master of Arts degree in Peace Building from Universidad de los Andes. Mr. Quishpe focuses his research on disarm, demobilization, and reintegration of former combatants, democracy, reconciliation, and music in armed conflicts. So we thank to TRACE for giving us the opportunity to have this debate today as well. So let's start this dialogue with some context on the current situation, but not only in Colombia, but also in Latin America. Professor Kurtenbach, how does the situation in Colombia fit into the public security policies dynamics of the different governments in Latin America?
Okay, thanks. Hi, everybody. Hi, Indira. Thanks for the very nice introduction. I think Colombia is a counterexample for the current trend in Latin America to use again repressive security policies to cope with violence and crime. The background across the region is that Latin America is still the region most violent worldwide if you compare it to other regions, at least for context outside of open war like Ukraine or Syria. And what we see is at the moment in Latin America, we see two approaches. One is the traditional repressive hard fist approach, today very much popularized by Nayib Bukele, the Salvadorian president, who constructed a very big prison and incarcerated 70,000 young men. Not all of those members of the gangs, but just because they were young and marginalized, and most of them. And the other approach is by Colombia's president Gustavo Petro. And this is a very innovative approach because he wants to talk with all armed actors, so not only with those framed as political armed actors, but also with those traditionally classified as criminal actors. And this doesn't mean that he wants to negotiate with them, but he wants to dialogue and talk about the ways they subordinate themselves under the rule of law and lay down their arms. So these are the two approaches. And what we see in public opinion polls, for example, is that Bukele is super popular, not only in his own country, but also across Latin America. There was a survey in Colombia last week telling us that 60% of Colombians would like to have a president like Nayib Bukele. At the same time, these repressive approaches come with a high level of fallout regarding human rights, not only for those people in prison, but also for other people, surveillance. Talking about the prisons, there's talk about, or there are reports by Amnesty International of torture and other ways. And on the contrary, but we will talk about this more in detail, is the total peace approach, as nobody knows how this can work. And as nobody is sure that in the end it will really help to reduce violence, it comes with a lot of uncertainty. And so people are rather skeptical, and it's not a short-term approach that works. So it's a very difficult situation, but I would say that in the best of all cases, Colombia could be a model not just for Latin America, but for other places in the world as well.
Thank you, Professor Kurtenbach. So as you said, this total peace approach is uncertain, but it's also it couldn't be considered a short-term approach. So Professor Peters, could you give us an overview of the present status of the process that the Colombian government has called total peace, and what does it mean, total peace in Colombia?
Yeah, thank you, Indira, and well, also good evening to all of the audience. So actually, well, we hear about total peace. I think at least those of you who are German-speaking might have some associations which seem that this is a rather weird expression. However, the idea is, and I think we have to understand that in Colombia, after the peace agreement, very much which got a lot of attention, not only in Colombia, not only in Latin America, but all over the world, the peace agreement of 2016 between Colombian government and the guerrilla group of the FARC-EP, so the oldest and largest guerrilla group at that time here in Latin America. So we have to understand that this was an important step towards peace. If we look at what happened afterwards, then we can see, well, do we really have peace in Colombia? And probably not, at least not in all regions of Colombia. So basically, we have to have in mind what already was said by Sabine, that there are different non-state armed actors. Both of those who are more well, generally known as political actors with political status, and others like, well, we could argue there are some criminal gangs, we have kind of neo-paramilitary groups, and, well, all kind of different actors. So this brings us to a question, well, did nothing change with the peace agreement? And I would say, of course, a lot has changed. But we also, so we have progress. We have progress related, for instance, to transitional justice mechanisms. We have also progress in a lot of regions in Colombia, which where security situation has clearly improved. We had kind of a positive demobilization of FARC members, but we also have to mention that there is still a lot to do. So we have also problems in the implementation, especially when it comes to factors like the so-called integral rural reform, or, well, also related to security situation of former combatants. And we have seen that in other regions, especially if we look to the frontier with Venezuela, but also in the south with Ecuador, we probably will talk also about that later, or at the Pacific coast, well, and other places as well, security situation has not improved or even got worse. So, and I think this is the situation we have to have in mind when we analyze this total peace approach. I totally agree with Sabine, that is very, very innovative, ambitious. Probably we will not see in a short term that all these armed actors will demobilize. We will have ups and downs, and there are a lot of uncertainties, a lot of open questions. But I think, first of all, we have to, or we could highlight, stress that the current government makes these or opens the way for dialogues, and we already have a ceasefire which has recently, well, for some days expanded. We hope that we will have a longer ceasefire with the ELN, one of the largest guerrilla group right now. And this is also something, perhaps a different approach if we compare it to the peace agreement with FARC-EP. Because during the peace negotiations with FARC-EP, 2012 to 2016, it was dialogue with ongoing armed actions between the government and the guerrilla. Here now the approach is different. Let's start to have a ceasefire, a bilateral ceasefire between the government and the ELN, and while we are in the dialogues. So this is a different approach. And we also have to mention that this does not necessarily mean that there are no armed actions, because there are other armed groups within the territory, and there are confrontations between the ELN and other armed groups. So perhaps in order to sum it up, we have a very complex situation in Colombia with a lot of non-state armed actors who are still active. Some are stronger, some have presence in different parts of the countries. Others are more local ones. And actually, I think it's also important to highlight that when we talk about Colombia, we want to have an assessment of the situation in Colombia. We always have to be kind of cautious because we have to differentiate between the different regions. It is very different in some regions than in others.
Thank you, Professor Peter. Yeah, as you said, like, did nothing change in 2016, or has anything changed? Are there like any stronger groups in different regions of the country? And I think that's one of the main issues in Colombia. And so I would ask Mr. Quishpe if you could give us or offer us an X-ray or an analysis of the dissident groups who inherited the power of the former FARC guerrilla members or guerrilla groups.
Yeah. Thank you, Indira, and good afternoon from Bogota, Colombia. Thank you, Trace, also for the invitation and for organizing this event. Yeah, as you said, I'm going to give a brief context on the armed groups that were born out of the peace process with the FARC guerrillas in 2016 and their disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration process. So I think we can divide these groups into two, the dissident groups and the rearmed groups. So I prepared a couple of slides, so I'll share my screen. You see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have dissident groups were formed mostly by those former combatants who refused to enter the Havana process in 2016 and who formed different groups throughout the country. Right now, they are grouped into the Estado Mayor Central, and this group operates mainly in the south, southeast, southwest part of the country, and some areas of the northeast, as we can see in the map. And it now groups around 3,000 people and acts as a federated organization, bringing together different dissident groups at national level. They recently, with the total peace process, have begun internal common dialogues to establish greater coordination. On the other hand, we have these rearmed groups, and the rearmed groups were mostly made of former combatants, especially mid-level and some high-level commanders, who, after entering the reintegration process, decided to return to arms. And they are now known as Segunda Marquetalia. And this group also operates in the south of the country and has a smaller presence in other regions in Colombia, as we can see also in the map. And it is estimated that it has half of the number of combatants of the dissident groups, with which it's in constant military confrontation. It's important to say that both groups have reclaimed the flags left by the FARC, although it is still a black box, the ideology and the internal socialization process of combatants. However, both groups have also recruited a significant number of children and people who had not previously been part of armed groups, which speaks of a continuum of violence in rural areas after the Havana peace process.
So as Professor Kurtenbach was saying in the first part, the peace process or the paz total or total peace wants to reunite like all groups, and the government wants to talk to all armed actors. Of course, it is not an easy issue. We cannot easily draw a line between what is a dialogue and what is a negotiation. And I think that's one of the main concerns in Colombia. And so I would like to ask you all if you could provide us with some insight into the dialogues or negotiations with the groups such as the AGC, ELN, and the dissidents. I think we can start with Professor Peters in this round.
Yes, so perhaps I would like to focus on the dialogues with the ELN. So the ELN is a guerrilla group which has also a long history of several decades in Colombia, with presence in different parts of the country. And it is first, I think it's important, those of you who are more familiar with Colombia, of course, you're very much aware of that. It's not the first time that the Colombian government wants to come towards peace dialogues, peace negotiations with the ELN. And this time it is a little bit different. What I already mentioned, there is a ceasefire that has really been, from my point of view, a big success. Last June, if I'm not totally wrong, it was announced. And we have currently ongoing dialogues in Havana. We have some different rounds of dialogues between the delegation of the government and the delegation of the ELN, of course, also with international actors accompanying. And I think here what we have already some agreements. For instance, very important for the ELN is the fact that they want to make civil society participation in the process. However, it is also kind of a challenge how to organize this. How to organize, for instance, and here drawing a little bit also on the title of this conversation, amidst violence. So how can we participate? How can we make sure that civil society is able to participate amidst violence? What kind of participation is there? Is there, what kind of pressure might there be on civil society members if there is a de facto territorial control of armed actors? So, but on the other hand, we also have the question, when we look at these remote areas where there are especially, strongholds of ELN, but also of other non-state armed actors. So we also have some more structural problems. So if we want the local population, local civil society to participate, that means for a lot of them, what are the conditions, the social, the economic conditions also in order to be able to participate? How can we make sure that those most affected by the conflict will also be able to raise their voices in these moments of participation? So basically, or perhaps generally speaking, that it's not always the same who will participate. So those civil society organizations which are more organized, stronger, with more resources, how can we make sure that also these other voices will become important voices in these participation processes? This, of course, also includes issues of social inequalities, intersectional approaches to these inequalities. How can we make sure that, for instance, women from rural areas, indigenous, Afro-Colombian, peasant groups will also be able to bring their ideas into these participation processes? Then there are other challenges I think we also have in these negotiations, which has not been addressed that much until now, which has to do with a question of, it is not only about, of course, it's very important, of reducing the violence, improving the security situation, the humanitarian situation in the regions, also what I just mentioned, the participation, but what comes after being optimistic after, for instance, a peace accord? How do we deal with the crimes committed? What about, for instance, the issues of dealing with the past? What kind of justice, transitional justice, probably mechanisms will we have? There is some discussion also, and of course we are building, we are not constructing it right from the, or everything new. Colombia has a long and important history of transitional justice mechanisms. Actually, today was as a consequence of the peace agreement with the FARC-EP, there is a lot of discussion and a lot of interest also internationally. We had, for instance, in this cycle of conferences some weeks ago, presentation of the judge Lili Rueda of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace. So there are ongoing transitional justice processes, and now if we will have success in these peace dialogues with ELN, there will be probably a new layer of transitional justice. So these issues will be, we will have to address them. And of course, it is also a question, I think, one of the lessons learned, not only from the peace agreement and post-agreement context after FARC-EP, is how can we make sure that if we will have demobilization of ELN, that these regions, strongholds of ELN, will not be controlled afterwards by new or other non-state armed actors. So how can we make sure that we will really have, let's say, long-lasting peace and really, well, I'm not sure. We always take this word of sustainable, and perhaps it's sometimes overused, but a form how we can make it sure that the situation will improve on a also mid and long-term level for local population. I think it is an issue of security, of course, but it's also an issue of economic and social development.
Yeah, I would like to ask you something else and to add to what you just said about the what happens after we have a peace agreement, for instance, with the ELN. And so some people would say, and we see in the news some concerns and some doubts about the unity of a group such as ELN. Can we say that the whole group is conducting these peace dialogues with the government, and that we already have like done some dissidents within the group, so there is no successful peace agreement? But since we already start having those doubts, what would you like to add to that concern?
Yeah, well, important point, and thank you for asking on this. So first of all, ELN, we probably all do share the same concerns. So is there really unity within ELN? And probably what we could at least say is that there are spoilers. Something which should not be that surprising in peace dialogues. But for instance, well, those of you who like football, for instance, might have heard about the kidnapping of the parents of one of a very famous football player, Luis Diaz. And so this was also a point which made or which brought a lot of doubts about if ELN really wants to come to a peace accord and yeah, and so on. So if they really want to proceed here, ELN argues, well, we need money. We have to continue with action. So if you want us to stop that, then well, give us money in order to be able to maintain our structures. Of course, also a big issue how to deal with these points. Another point you also mentioned is there probably we will not, and this term total peace, I think, well, we have to be aware that there won't be a total peace, 100% of the combatants who will demobilize. And that will also probably not be the case for the ELN. So there will be part of the ELN who will not, if we get a positive outcome of these dialogues, there will be probably dissidents. However, and that would be my position here, if we would manage to demobilize a big amount of those combatants, this would be a big success. But this will only be a success if we also manage what I just mentioned to make sure that this will not be a new recycling of violence and other groups entering into these regions.
So thank you, Professor Peter. So I will give the floor to you, Professor Kurtenbach. to talk about a group that is a part of the dissidents. In this case, is the AGC.
Yes, actually, at the bottom of all the debate is the dichotomic distinction between political and criminal groups. And while I can see that this is important for public debates and for politicians, I think it's highly problematic because there is no clear-cut distinction. For example, who defines what's criminal? That's the state. If we think back in the case of Colombia to the early years, the first decade of the 21st century, the FARC were considered narco-terrorists. So this is clearly a criminal framing of a political group. And we see this across the world. Colombia is not a unique case, that governments tend to criminalize their armed opponents. This is one thing. I don't want to justify armed opponents. That's not the point. I think it's difficult if you put the groups in this part of the game, to put it somehow. The other thing is the political. My feeling is always that even so-called criminal political or criminal armed and non-state armed actors might have political goals, and as a minimum it might be to preserve the status quo, the unequal, unjust status quo where they can do their enterprises, their illegal drug trafficking, human trafficking, whatsoever, corruption and that sort of stuff. But this is highly political, not only in Colombia, in many countries. If you have groups that with violence want to preserve the status quo. On the other side, we have also criminal actors in the political field. If we think about all the parapolitical scandals in Colombia, where we had a close collaboration between political parties, or congressmen and paramilitary groups. So there is no clear-cut line where you say, well, from here to the whatever, left or right, it's criminal, and on the other side, it's political. It's not viable. So I think the binary classification does more harm than it does help. On the other side, what is true is if you want to talk, dialogue, or have a conversation with groups you consider not political, you also need a legal frame. And this is more than true for Colombia, because Colombia is a very, very legalistic country, right? So, and it has a long history of these conversations or these demobilization processes, even with groups considered criminal. Think about paramilitary groups in the early 2000s. You had a large demobilization process. I don't know, I think 30,000, correct me if I'm wrong, paramilitaries demobilized at some point. The problem is, and Stefan and Rafael already pointed that out, there was a recycling and a reproduction of these groups, because the best example is the former leader of the Autodefensas Gaitanistas de Colombia, Otoniel. He started as a guerrilla fighter in the EPLL, one of the guerrilla groups. Then he demobilized. Then he started to work with the AOC, the paramilitary groups. He demobilized. And then he was the leader of the Clan del Golfo or AGC, whatever. And then he was caught, or he submitted himself. That's not so sure. And then he was extradited to the United States. So this is a very interesting example of recycling of armed actors if you don't change the structural conditions for people to have a living or whatsoever. And so the Clan del Golfo or AGC, when President Petro pronounced or initiated the total peace policy, they said, we are with you, we are political, we want to have a conversation with you. So then there was even a bilateral ceasefire at the first 3 months in 2023. But then they didn't stop, or then there were some incidents where the Clan del Golfo did fight the state public forces. So then the government said, no, okay, it's over. We're going to fight you again with the military. And so since then, all the debate on the legal basis that was in the Colombian Congress and in public opinions in society made it really, really difficult to get to a table with those groups. And the problem is, an American colleague put it, maybe you have to negotiate with the devil to avoid hell. So my feeling would be what is needed are humanitarian dialogues at the community level, because what we also see when we look at violence data, most of the non-state armed groups, and the Clan del Golfo is just the biggest of those, they don't fight primary, or they don't fight mostly against the state forces. They fight each other, and they commit horrendous acts of violence against civil society and communities. So even if the ALN has a ceasefire with the government, they are under severe attack and fight against the other groups. So this is another gray zone. So if you are somebody who should monitor the ceasefire, how can you decide what this wasn't against the public forces, but this was against other? It's not always so clear cut. And I think this is one of the major problems we see in Colombia and in similar situations, that you have a vast gray zone. And in these gray zones, it's very easy to spread fake news. It's very easy to spread fear. It's very easy to spread violence. The biggest problem in post-accord Colombia is the massive murder of demobilized former FARC fighters, and I'm sure Rafael can tell us a lot about this, and of human rights defenders, social activists, community leaders. And these are the reform actors a peace process needs, because the reduction of armed violence, direct physical violence, is a first step. But we see all the recycling. You need to change structures. And to do this, you need those reform actors. And if they are killed, this is clearly political, even if criminal actors are supposed to be the main offenders.
Yeah, Professor Kurtenbach, I would like to go back to this say, negotiate with the devil to avoid hell. And I think the government has no easy task within the framework of the total peace law, because it's like drawing this line, this differentiation between to conduct like negotiations with the ALN, but on the other hand, only approaches or conversations with other groups, so-called high impact crime groups. And every time in Colombia, the Congress passed a new law, so we changed these new groups. And I think that's another issue, and for people who are suffering the violence in the different regions of Colombia, for them is, regardless of the way you call it, negotiation, approach, conversation, for them, if the situation doesn't change, it doesn't matter what it takes, because for them it's going to be the same circle of violence. So I think that's an issue we have to address in Colombia, and go beyond the legalities, even though I'm a lawyer. Have this conversation, but I do understand that we have to act within the frame law of the total peace, but it doesn't make any easier the way to a government to have like this, or to have a successful, not even agreement, but at least a try.
The other thing is, what we also have to bear in mind is the Petro government doesn't have a real majority in Congress. So there was a vast coalition, but super heterogeneous at the very beginning, which went away. But and so what can you do in a situation where you need a law, a legal basis? And I agree, you need a legal basis for this, because it can't be the president says, oh, I'm going to talk with person A or person B. It needs to be on a similar, on a legal basis, so that it's the same for everybody. But if you don't have a stable coalition, this is super complicated, because other political actors are going to cook their own political interests into this and so on. So we also have to be fair. It's not just that he can't do it. He can't do it because he doesn't have the majority. And if we look forward in 2 years, there might be a very different government. So this is super complicated. And the other thing is, you need a minimum of justice to the victims, and you need a minimum of human rights standards for all groups who are going to demobilize. I remember when the government of Álvaro Uribe talked to or demobilized the AUC, the paramilitaries, there was a lot of debate on at the international level. You have to adhere to a minimum international standards to do this. And I totally agree. And there was a lot of pressure, and in the end, it was not ideal. It's never ideal. But you have to have these minimum standards according to international law. And this guaranteeing human rights and so on. And this is the way forward. Otherwise, you just are recycling other armed actors, and it won't go anywhere.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Quishpe, and now to you. So what is the stand with the dissident groups?
Yeah. So regarding to the peace process with the dissident and rearmed groups, the government of Gustavo Petro has held talks with both groups, but in different ways. A political negotiation channel has been maintained with the dissidents under the assumption that these groups are mostly made of people who never entered to the peace process in 2016 and have a peace agenda that they want to discuss. Right now, a bilateral ceasefire has been agreed until July of 2024, and rounds of dialogue are currently taking place here in Bogota, with a previous roundtables in Cauca, in Catatumbo. I think the dialogues are progressing well, but are quite conditional, as Stefan said, on compliance with the ceasefire. As on previous occasions, the non-compliance with the ceasefire has led to a crisis at the table. On the other hand, the negotiation with the rearmed groups of Segunda Marquetalia has been more complex. On the one hand, as Sabine said, because it is composed mostly of recidivists of the Havana peace process, and it is more difficult to prove right now their character as a political group. And legally, so far, only their submission could be the option. Even there are negotiators of 2026 peace process who consider that this is the way to go. And even, I think this is today one of the most important challenges for the government, which has been looking for ways to show the political character of this guerrilla. And it should also be noted that with the death of several of the main commanders of this group in the Venezuela frontier, it has been difficult for the public opinion to know more about the approaches between the parties and the advances of the negotiation. So far, there are only approaches right now that will not move forward until the character of the group is resolved. And I would like to emphasize what it has to mean to carry out these negotiations, not only amid violence, but also amid the implementation of the 2026 peace agreement. And specifically, as Sabine said, with the reincorporation of former combatants who remain committed to the civilian life. To date, more than 400 of them have been killed, and half of those crimes are attributed to the dissident or the rearmed groups. So therefore, it is urgent not only to advance in the negotiation agendas, but also to call attention to clarify and reduce this type of crimes, since in many regions of the country, the reincorporated population and the active armed groups coexist. I see a big challenge, and it is the urgency to connect the process of total peace with the implementation of the Havana Agreement. And that is right now one of the biggest criticisms that has been made to the Total Peace Project from different groups, victims, ex-combatants, NGOs, and so on. So let me launch here a proposal that maybe could be interesting, and is to give in this total peace process a relevant mediation role to former FAREP ex-combatants who were mid-level commanders during the war. I think they are currently leading different process, economic process, a social process, even a political process, and their experience can be used to reduce violence and conflict at local level.
Yeah, I think it's not an easy task to explain to the public audience why it is important to conduct conversations or dialogues with those rearmed groups, because what part of the criticism is that they already were given an opportunity, even if you can say that, and they didn't want to stay within the framework of the past peace agreement. And I think it was in the past, it was more easy to give the impression that it was legitimate to negotiate with groups because they were political groups, as Professor Kurtenbach was saying. But now we are not running out of reasons to justify that they are not political anymore, but we still have this discussion on, okay, are they political groups, or they have only financial reasons to stay in arms to continue this type of way of living and conducting this war between groups and with the state as well. So what do you think about the way to communicate it to the public audience? What is it important to include all those groups, even if they are rearmed groups or dissident groups?
Yeah, I think we have a big challenge, and it has to do with the social legitimacy of these dialogues. As you can see, after the 2026 agreement, the social mobilization for peace in Colombia declined significantly, in part because new agendas emerged in the national discussion by not having violence at the center of discussion. However, I think such an ambitious project like the Total Peace needs greater citizen participation. And I think with this participation can take different forms. For example, throughout demonstrations in the streets, with a more active and broad participation in the spaces for participations provided by the negotiation tables, or throughout public discussions of this issue in schools, universities, companies, cultural centers, forums, etc. So right now, I think we don't have this type of discussions in the public scenario, and it's important to do the civil society take another role in this negotiation, not only with FARC, not only with ELN, but also with the other groups that are being part of the negotiation right now.
Yeah. So, Mr. Quishpe, since you already started to talk about the challenges, so I would like to ask Professor Peters about the main challenges and obstacles to the achievement of total peace in Colombia.
Yeah, well, quite a lot. So where to start? So first of all, I think we already mentioned some of them. So I think Sabine argued also, well, what will happen in 2 years? So actually, the current government put a lot of its political capital into these negotiations, dialogues, into total peace. So until now, there is some progress, but there is still a lot of way to go. And only 2 years until, well, not next elections, but well, with a campaign and so on. So they are actually in a kind of weak negotiation position. Of course, the armed actors know that probably the government needs success. However, we could bring it to a little bit the other way around. What happens if the next government will be a government which we already heard about the opinion polls, which does not agree. And I liked very much this start of Sabine with his 2 approaches towards security. What if there will be, of course, no one knows, 2 years is still a lot of time, but what happens if there will be a very, very different government and these non-state armed groups will, so there won't be negotiations, the door is closed. So I think this is also something we have to have in mind. We have today the backing of international community, having in mind that there are so many other crises all over the world. I think that is important to stress. That is an asset. And I think very important is to come to a kind of a point of no return, whatever that is. And perhaps there is never really a point of no return, but a point where we can say, okay, we have proceeded, we have advanced so much that it's really costly for any political force to stop these advances towards peace. However, now there come other kind of challenges. I already talked about the social situation. So I think a big challenge is once again what happens in the territories, both in terms of security, I think we already talked about it, but also related to social situation. I think what we can see in a lot of these remote areas is kind of a lack of hope, lack of thinking that we can get a better life, well, with hard work, education, and so on. First of all, because there is hardly any education opportunities. There isn't any, or there are very few legal job opportunities. There are and then these armed actors, I do not want to justify, but I think we have to explain why it is attractive to be part of a non-state armed actor. There are different layers, I think. One of it is more socioeconomic. Others might be with, having some kind of power, having arms and so on, or which might have to do with masculinities, with other issues. But I think we have to understand, first of all, why it is for some. We also have to stress that not all people find it attractive, but for some it is attractive to join these armed actors. And we have to tackle these problems. And I think that is only possible if we also think about socioeconomic changes, more opportunities. And although I am quite aware that it is a term which is not that fixed with a definition, but I think we have to think about the possibilities of a way of living in dignity, whatever that means for any person. I think that might be a very different thing, but I think this is an important point. And let's also talk about the elephant in the room. So it is about a challenge is that a lot of these options of financiation of the non-state armed actors. Of course, we have to talk about illicit drugs. We also have to talk about illegal mining. Well, that has also to do not only with Colombia. We have to see that it is an international dimension, that when we look into the news in the last weeks, we saw it also in Ecuador, the situation. So we should not try to analyze these challenges just like Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico, or whatever country we are talking about will be able to fix it on a national level. No, these are international illicit economies, and we have to find answers at an international level. And I think there's still a lot to be done. There are politically, I know it is very, very difficult to think a little bit more outside the box and to have approaches, for instance, in international drug regulation policies that, well, will find other approaches, which is not the war on drugs, which I think has not been successful and especially violent, not only in the Global South, but especially violent in the Global South and in Latin America. So I think we have these different challenges. First of all, at a level of negotiations, will we be able to make use of this window of opportunity right now? Will it be closed afterwards? The other one is about more the socioeconomic and also security situation in the regions. How can we really make important, more structural changes in order to improve it? And also not to forget the international dimension, especially when it comes to illicit financial flows.
Thank you, Professor Peterson. I just realized I should have reframed the question and just not to limit it to the total peace in Colombia, but at least when we see what is going on in Ecuador, so it's just the proof that you can have an issue and you translate it the same to a neighboring country when the roots of the issue can be in any country in Latin America. So before going to Professor Kurtenbach, I would like to invite the audience who is watching the event on the Trace YouTube channel to ask the questions and to send the questions to the panelists. Professor Kurtenbach, so please.
No, just one point because I totally agree with Stefan. What Ecuador shows is how multi-level, multi-scalar these processes are. If 5 years ago, Ecuador was one of the less violent countries in the region. And then we had like a series of developments at the local level inside Ecuador, at the national level, at the regional level, at the frontier between Ecuador and Colombia. And we have this increasing demand for drugs. And as long as there is an increase in demand, people will produce and trade drugs. This is if we saw this with the prohibition early in the 20th century, and we see it today. And if we don't curb demand, and if we don't combat like money laundering and corruption, Colombia won't be able to find peace, nor Ecuador, because in Ecuador, a collateral damage of the Colombian peace agreement is that the border between Colombia and Ecuador, which was controlled by FARC and was not, and there was not a lot of traffic from one side to the other, now it's open. So this is really one of the perverse effects of a peace agreement. And the super good streets you have in Ecuador, this is also a factor enabling trade from drugs between Bolivia, Peru, Colombia, and the Ecuadorian ports. It's a lot of small things, and the political crisis you had in Ecuador for the last years. So it's like a puzzle. And if you don't attend to all the pieces of the puzzle and to the interactions between them, you won't be able to solve it. You will be here a bit and there a bit, but in the meantime, the puzzle redesigns or reconfigures itself, and you can start fresh anew. So this is really, you need integrated strategies, you need cooperative strategies, you need a minimum consensus, and this is true at the international level, because they're the bad guys, they produce the drugs. It's only a part of the truth, because who consumes the drugs? It's not mostly not people in South America and other parts of the global South. It's in the USA, it's in the US, it's in the EU and other parts of the world. So you need to tackle and confront all the different pieces at the same time, and this is really complicated. But the same in Colombia and in Ecuador, if you don't have like a minimum consensus on how to cope with these problems, it's super complicated. You won't get anywhere, I'm quite sure.
I see you want to add something, Professor Peters.
Very briefly. Actually, currently, different mayors from Hamburg, from Rotterdam and Antwerp, as far as I understand, are in the region. Yesterday, as far as I understand, they've been in Buenaventura. Today, they will go to Ecuador. And it is not by coincidence, I guess, that they want to talk about security issues of these mayors of port cities in Europe. And hopefully, they will also come up with ideas, with projects, with measures which understand the connection between what happens here in Latin America and what happens in Germany with the consumption markets.
Yeah, and Mr. Quishpe, you would like to add something to what you already said?
Yeah, Ray mentioned to challenge the connection between the total peace process and the 2016 peace process and the legitimacy of the total peace in civil society. But I would like to point out an additional challenge, and is to understand in depth the ways of rebel governance that these groups have established in the places where they are present right now. For example, recently, the Dissident Groups inaugurated roads in southwest municipalities in Cauca, and they are also establishing norms of coexistence in rural areas, as FARC-EP did in the 90s. So I think we need to understand more clearly how they related to civil society and with the local institutions. And as this will help us to have a better understanding of how the state should be effectively present in these places and not repeat past mistakes. Yeah, I just want to say that.
So I think the question the answer to the next question has already given during the discussion, but still I want to ask that to you is what role plays or should play academia in a process as complex as the total peace process, or as the process of like international crime networks such as for instance in Ecuador and Colombia. So I will start or with Mr. Quishpe, please.
Yeah, from my point of view, the academia generally goes at other rhythms. So in-depth analysis has been done on the Havana process, and only few academics have yet come close to analyze the phenomena of total peace, partly because of the recentness of the process and partly because of access to information. But therefore, I believe at this moment, the academia could contribute in three ways. The first one is to establishing theoretical frameworks to analyze this complex phenomenon. Second one is to accompanying social organizations in their participation at the multiple dialogue tables. And the third one is promoting process of reflection and debate on total peace in universities and other spaces, like, for example, spaces like related to the truth commissions or the judicial and transitional justice mechanisms. So I think the academia has a very important role in the urban areas, and it's a challenge to take more role in the rural areas. Yeah.
So maybe I will stay in that last part about the rural areas. So Professor Kurtenbach, what do you have to say about it? The rural areas, especially in Colombia. I think in countries like Germany, they have like another ways to approach, and there is no such a strong division, and we are a very centralized country in Colombia. So most of the times, big universities are in the biggest cities in the country, and education is something that is quite new, and so in some areas, or at least like high level education is very new in certain areas in Colombia. How can we get like closer to those areas, and especially because those areas are the most affected by the armed conflict?
Yes, it's a difficult question, but it's a very good question. But I think it's not all about education and academia. I work in an institute, part of the Leibniz Association, and the Leibniz Association, these are non-university research institutes in Germany of different areas, not only social sciences, but also other parts. And the motto of the Leibniz Association is Theoria cum praxi. And this is, we have a mandate, or we are very much encouraged to translate and transfer the knowledge we generate with our research to the broader society. It's not just stay in the university and your Torre de Marfil and make very nice models, but think about what does this mean, not only for politics, but also for civil society, for broader society, for the broader society. And I think this is one way. And here, what we academics need to learn is we need to have new methods, because it's right. Who is going to read a thick book on total peace in Colombia, be it in the rural areas of Germany or even in Colombia? You have to be very, very creative and do a video, do a comic strip, do an infographic. And I think we can do a lot of things. Talk to people, go to the areas where these people live and give them back what you learned from them when you did your field research. And so I think we all can do a lot and much more. The problem is that the incentives in academia to do this are very, very low. So most people I know who do it because they are convinced of the necessity to do it, but it's not incentivized in the universities. And actually, CAPAZ is a very good example where you try to do this, right? With regional university and universities, and not only in Bogota. And this is a very good approach, and I think you can defend this. And the other thing is what I learned, because I also worked many years as consultant, is I was like, well, what you are doing is complexification. And then policymakers said, stakeholders, I need simplification. And I will always answer, but to be able to do simplification, you need to understand how complex the thing is. And then you can, if you understood that, you can say, well, where is the main entry point where I can have the biggest impact with what I want to do and what I think is necessary to do. But this is also a way few academics think about these things. But now, currently, what I say, there are some networks of academics from Europe, from Colombia, from Venezuela, from the US, who are trying to figure out all the problems around total peace and the concept, and how this could make how this could have impact, not just in Colombia, but also in Venezuela and beyond. And I think this is the sort of stuff I personally love to do.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Kurtenbach. And now to you, Professor Peters.
Yeah, thank you. And also totally agree that it is important. So I think academia can play a role, an important role. Of course, it is not the only and not the most important actor. However, what can we do? So we do research. Here, once again, the question is what kind of research and what do we do with the results, not staying at the ivory tower. However, I think what we see, for instance, in Colombia is that there is a lot of research on the armed actors, on the history of the conflict, but also on what is currently going. There is really a lot of very, very good research, which often we do not manage to channel it to those who have to take decisions. Having in mind, totally agree with you, Rafael, that the speed of or the rhythms are different, of course. And I think we should not try to say, well, today there is an event and we give the research-backed answer tomorrow. That is nonsense. We are not able to do so. We need time to do research, but we can build upon what we know, for instance, from longer research in order to make it more complex. Totally agree with you, Sabine. And I think it is important because actually if policymakers tell us, well, it's too complex, let's make it or simplify it. Okay, but do we want simple or decisions made based on simple messages, or do we want to make good decisions? That afterwards it's important to simplify. Okay, totally agree as well. What we also can do is, well, it was already mentioned, the way how to distribute, how to communicate, science communication, for instance. And actually, I think Rafael is a very, very good example of that, working with music, working with fanzines, working with all kind of things which are actually not only the traditional ways of presenting research. And I would argue, I would like to bring one more point, and I think Colombia is a very, very good example for that, what universities, what academics do here. And that is what we in Germany and Europe call third mission. And we thought, well, it's something new. Or even service learning in the neoliberal form of this kind of outreach. However, if you look what Colombian universities, often with very, very few resources, do in terms of extension, I'm not sure if that's the term in English here, it is really impressive. So how researchers work with, especially also from the regional, from the smaller universities, with community members, what kind of prestige they have in the local communities. And I think that is also something which is really, really outstanding, and where academia really manages to accompany the local organizations. And I think here there is a lot of potential. Perhaps also thinking about when it comes to research of all of the challenges we mentioned before. I think, yes, there is research. We also need more research about it, having in mind that we won't have the results tomorrow. But I think we have learned that these, if we want to have positive outcomes, we need at least midterm, if not long-term, strategies. And so perhaps sometimes it's also important to tell policymakers, okay, we have to act now, but we also have to have in mind that tomorrow the situation will not be over. We need also more long-lasting structures that may give us the opportunity to, to at least contribute towards a more stable and more successful peace process.
Yeah, there is something I think we need to discuss here is about the complex issues and simple messages. Because I agree, a problem could be really complex, but the decision-making process for the ones who are more affected, but like the peace process, or when they have to vote, they need to get a message, and the message has to be simple. How to simplify it? That's the question. And I think the academia should contribute to that, because we cannot leave this task only to a government. We saw already what happened back in 2016 with the referendum here in Colombia. The government was convinced that they were communicating effectively, and maybe not, because we know already the result. And maybe the ones who do not agree with a way the government is negotiating, they can have like very simple means to get the message, and it can be sometimes not the right message. And so I would stay on that point and ask Mr. Quishpe and Professor Peters, well, do we have to have this discussion about how to simplify these complex issues in the academia?
Well, I'm not sure if you want to go ahead, or Rafael, or okay. Okay, so I'm not sure if I agree with you. I think that we need, of course, for political campaigns and so on, and for political support, probably well done academic research article is not the best way in order to get political support. I totally agree on that. But I'm not sure, and I also agree that we have to find new ways how to communicate research or results from research. But I'm not sure if academia really should do the work of campaigning. I think this is the work of politicians. So that's not necessarily what we should do. What we should do, I think, is also showing, for instance, when easy messages are too simplistic. For instance, if we think about, so what we discussed, okay, the problem now is here because of violence and for instance, also with illicit drugs and so on. But I think if we do not see what is behind it also on the global level, we will find answers which are probably not that goal-oriented, or we will not have that good decision. So I think sometimes it's also the way of how we can bring more complexity, or at least challenge very easy answers. And I think that, yes, we could do. There's and once again, it is also about what we can do. So I do not want to argue in line of, well, let's do not try to have public or to dialogue with the general public. I think, yes, we should do, but not necessarily in trying to find easy messages, simple messages.
Okay, so I have already started. Okay, Mr. Quishpe.
Yeah, I just want to add that I think that we can do is to work more on what is now as research creation, which is basically tries to translate the results of research in different formats, not only the papers of the articles, but in our language that may become more didactic for civil society. And I believe in Colombia we have a researcher who have done it quite well, and this also generates some legitimacy with the populations. So I think, yeah, this is an idea to continue working in this research creation model.
So thank you very much. And yeah, Professor Kurtenbach.
Just if I may jump in for a minute, I think what we need to do is clarify that peace is not a state of being. It's not you end a war and then you have peace. But this is a very minimalistic conception of peace. But peace is a process, and it's not a short-term process. But you can, even if you stop a war or an armed conflict, for peace to flourish, it needs a lot more. So, and this is complicated. I think academics and politicians should raise awareness for this. And this would be a very important contribution, because there is no thing as evil as deception of hopes. And I think Colombia did quite well in 2016, because none of the people I talked to said, well, we will sign the peace agreement and then we will have paradise. They were all very down to earth, and this is a process and this will take time. And so what I never understood is why the government then didn't try to have a positive narrative at the same time. You don't have to promise honey and milk, but you need to have a positive vision why it's necessary to do this. I think then a lot of people would buy into such a process.
Okay, so I have already started getting some questions, and I have one to Professor Kurtenbach. Is how do you define political goals? Is it linked to the establishment of a gender social order? How do criminal groups differ from political groups in this regard?
The $100,000 question. I think there's no clear definition of political. If you think back to the 1970s, it was everything is political, private is political. So it's defining what is political is already a statement of where you stand. So because there will be things that are political for one group or person and not the other. I think the difference between the political and the criminal groups is that the political, most of the groups that have clearly political goals, they say, well, we want to be the government. We want to change, I don't know, the income distribution. We want to change the system of governance. We want to change, I don't know what. So, and the criminal groups, they are much more silent, because they are interested, most of those are interested in maintaining the status quo. They won't say, I'm interested in corruption because that allows me to get my drugs via the port authorities. They won't claim this publicly. So I think this is the main difference, that explicit political goals can be articulated publicly, and the criminal goals, they are criminal because they are illegal, and so people will be rather quiet about it. But this is, I know it doesn't really help as a distinction, but this is the observation I would make.
Okay, thank you, Professor Kurtenbach. So I have a question to Professor Peters. It's not really clear, but I think it's, can you elaborate a little bit more about the issue of social inequalities and armed conflict?
Well, that is also perhaps a little bit linked to the other question, because generally we thought that the political goals are those more linked to changes of social structures, changes also of the income distribution. And it also brings us to the question, which is a little bit linked to that, the big discussion of greed and grievances as causes for civil wars. However, when it comes to social inequalities, why it is, from my point of view, important or why we should have in mind social inequalities for peace, not only, but also in Colombia. So first of all, we all know that Colombia is one of the most unequal countries in the world. And that is basically true for, roughly all indicators. So it is income distribution, it is distribution of land tenure, it is distribution of wealth. But it is also, and that is something I always, and that's why I'm also happy that you raised this question, because it's also true for social mobility, or better, we should say the lack of social mobility. And I'm not getting tired to talk about one statistics from the OECD, which from my point of view is brutal. OECD in the report of 2018, which was called the broken social elevator or something like that, made or raised the question how many generations you need in order to be able for social upward mobility from the lowest decile, so the 10% with the lowest income, not in order to become rich, but just to get on the average. And there is a discussion if these statistics are totally accurate, and probably not, but OECD tells us it's 11 generation. 11 generation, and according to OECD, and a rather Eurocentric take of what is a generation for them is 30 years. So you don't have to be a historian in order to know that that was before Bolivar. And if that is more or less true, and I think it is really not the point if it's 11 or 10 generations, what these statistics together tell us is that we have extreme social inequalities, lasting extreme social inequalities, and these are rather so it's blocked. You do not have a there are very few, of course there are always exceptions, but there are very few possibilities in order to have social upward mobility. If that is true, and probably this statistic is not that well known, but probably a lot of people do suffer from what this statistic means. And if then we have, so first of all, we could talk about grievances, but I think we also, and that was my point when I talked about, we have to have in mind how we can give opportunities, especially in those remote areas where non-state armed actors do have presence, and they are kind of, if you allow me to put it in these terms, attractive job opportunity. An attractive job opportunity in spite of, everyone knows that it's dangerous, of course. People know, of course, that it's dangerous. But once again, if you do not see any other option, and I do not want to justify, I want to explain, but if we do not have in mind these data, I think it will be hard, even if we get positive outcomes of the dialogues, of the negotiations, it is really hard in order to make sure that there won't be a new be it a criminal gang, be it a more, if we want to make this division, a political actor or whatever. So if we do not if we do not attack these problems, these social problems.
Okay, and we have one more question to Mr. Quishpe. So, do you see any lessons learned from the peace agreement from 2016 regarding dissident groups and rearmed groups that can be applied to the ELN process?
Yeah, so I think ELN and FARC are different groups. As you noted before, the ELN are more like a federate group, and FARC has a hierarchical mode of operate. But I think, as I noted before, I think the role of mid-level commanders are so important. But it's important to know that right now, the mid-level commanders who are in the civilian life, they are doing a lot of good things, you know. So as I mentioned, I think we can take advantage of their knowledge, of war knowledge, to this total peace process. I think a second thing that is important is the way that the combatants are doing their reintegration process in the territories of the country. For example, the FARC established, I think, like 17 to 18 territorial spaces, and these spaces are right now very good examples of how to establish a reintegration process in the economical way and in the social ways. So I don't know if the ELN are thinking the same way to to conduct the mobilization or integration process. But I think these spaces are so important right now for the peace, for the implementation of peace process. And I think another issue that it's important to understand is the political desire to participate. For example, the FARC-EP created a political party that have shown mixed results. But I think we can or we need to understand more the ELN and know what they want to make in the political way. I think maybe the ELN wants to reintegrate more in the micro scenarios of political participations because they have strong links with civil society organizations. So I think it will be different than the FARC, but I think it's an important thing that we should take into account.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Quishpe. So I don't see any more questions from the audience, so I think we can start wrapping up our event. So, but before, I would like to ask our experts today, thank you very much for your kindness and share with us all your knowledge and your insights on this very important topic. And also, I would like to thank you, the audience who was watching the event on the Trace YouTube channel, and of course to Trace for giving us the opportunity to discuss all the issues we have had in our conversation today.